You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Hello, Star Wars fans.
I'm Alex,
And I'm Connor,
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
like we do from time to time.
So, our episode today is continuing our survey of visual media, and we're going to do a deep dive, episode by episode, into Visions Season 2.
I think it's fair to say that Vision Season 1 was one of our more favorite Star Wars media that Disney has released. I think it's just a fantastic collection of individual stories, giving different studios the opportunity to depict Star Wars through their own lens, and it provides opportunity just to fill the universe with more diverse storytelling.
Yeah, for those who have not seen Visions, each season has a collection of 9 episodes, each of which was animated by a different animation studio, each of which tells a unique story that is either connected or disconnected from the greater Star Wars universe, and uses the settings, the themes, and the aesthetic of Star Wars to tell a unique story.
And one major difference between this season and the last is that while Vision Season 1 was very much anime focused, a lot of anime companies.
Yeah, Japanese animation companies. Season 2 branched out into companies from across the world. So we're getting the French animation studio, Korean animation studio, Chilean animation studio, and more.
So if you thought that Vision Season 1 was varied in its visual stylings, just wait until you see the second season.
All right, so today we're going to go episode by episode. As I said, we're going to look at the great parts of each episode, how well we liked it, who we thought it's aimed for, the aesthetics that it's engaging in, and then where we think it could or might connect to a greater Star Wars continuity and canon, and then if we think it needs a continuation. Other than the Ronin episode of Season 1, nothing has received any kind of continuation, but I think many of them deserve one.
So, without further ado, let's begin with the episode Sith by El Guiri Studios. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it is a Spanish studio. And this was quite an episode to begin the season with as far as visuals go.
Yeah, so Episode 1, Season 2, Visions, Sith, much like Episode 1, Ronin of Season 1 of Visions, is the most visually experimental of any episode we have going on. Like, we do have a lot of visual experimentation going on, as we'll discuss, but the main character of this first episode is an artist, and the world around her changes depending on her mindset, her mood, and with the art that she's using, with paint splashes and her own mindset altering what she can and cannot see.
The paint itself transforms. It's growing darker and black, and she's trying to combat this with brighter imagery. And with, we get the sense that she is a Jedi. She is using, if I remember correctly, Force abilities, but besides the point, it's this idea of light versus darkness and trying to fill the world with more brightness.
Yeah, the main character, Lola, we first said, she might be a Jedi apprentice, and we learn later on in the episode, per the name of the episode, that she is a former Sith who has been hiding from her former Sith masters, set during the period of the High Republic. So with only her droid friend, she must survive the attacks of other Sith who come to force her back into the Order. And the primary theme of the episode is she has these dark force powers and predilections, and she's trying to suppress them and force them into a light way, and into the light side. And the climax of the episode involves her both for her art and in her combat against the Sith Master attempting to kill her, is to accept the dark parts of herself, not to utilize the dark side, but to admit, yes, they happened. I was that person, and it is something I must acknowledge, get past, move on. Visually symbolized by using a double-sided lightsaber that contains both a red and yellow blade.
And I've been kind of waiting for this 5-ever, just to have this double-sided lightsaber that has a dual color. There was art from the dawn of The Force Awakens where some Jedi or Sith was going to use a red and blue double-sided lightsaber, and the idea of that balance of light and dark is something I find quite interesting. But her her art in itself also shows this balance of maintaining darkness at the end, where it's a balance of light and dark, where she might not ever be able to eradicate the darkness of her past, but she needs to surround it with color, surround it with light, in order to become a more balanced being.
Yeah, and we are firmly at the stage in the Rule of the Sith where the Rule of Two is going on. So her Sith Master is trying to force her back as her apprentice. He has a couple of other potential apprentices, but they are much more easily dispatched. And I think it also shows some uncertainty in that at the end of the episode he tells her that she is now the Sith Master and needs to find an apprentice. Whether she does so, whether the darkness consumes her again or not, is left ambiguous. The episode is more hopeful in the fact that by accepting her past, moving on, she will be able to journey more into the light without being constantly troubled by her past deeds and actions.
And she does leave her home. She has been stuck on this planet creating this mural, and she does feel that it is time to now move on.
Yeah, so that's the themes. Let's talk about this one visually as well. We've talked about how the art that she's using colors the surroundings. We are engaged in on sort of a more almost cyberpunk aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Our main character has multiple cybernetic limbs. She has a droid main companion. She has this great-looking wheeled speeder that takes her across this planet that's cast in the light of an angry sun.
So it's something that is, again, visually striking. It's more of a 3D animated episode. And, again, everything in Season 1 was traditional 2D animation, Japanese aesthetic. So to have something that is so lively, it's more lively than anything we've seen in the Clone Wars or Tales of the Jedi. It's something that is elevated far beyond that in terms of having more of a surreal quality. When you think of Star Wars, you don't really think of things that are surreal, things that are dreamlike. Things usually are quite physical and tangible in this universe. So to have something that is so visually magical in terms of this paint swirling and just manipulating itself is something that I haven't seen in an animation studio, period, let alone in Star Wars.
Yeah, so I think aesthetically this one gets top marks for being experimental, but for also allowing that to inform its storytelling. Mm-hmm. As far as a continuation, I don't really think this one needs one. We could do more about Lola calling herself the Master, and does she fall to the dark side? Does she further maintain this fusion of light and dark? But I think we tell a complete story in this episode.
And we can kind of, guess if this is during the High Republic Rule of Two. She's not going to succeed. We have a Palpatine later on. There will be a return to darkness at some point.
Yeah, but whether she herself reaches a happy ending, I think the ending is fairly hopeful.
Right.
So we get to our next episode, Screecher's Reach, by Cartoon Saloon, an Irish animation studio.
Visually, this is this feels like a very nostalgic children's cartoon. Like if you ever seen I think it's Under the Garden Wall. I'm not sure like that, but it just feels like a cartoon pulled out of time, where it has this more classic aesthetic. And again, it's something that's very different, just because I haven't sat down and watched a lot of Irish cartoons, so I'm not exactly familiar with their animation style. But it's this idea of children on this kind of like workhouse planet, and they're going to go on a little adventure.
Yeah, so this episode is almost told in the style of a fable, or a coming-of-age story. We have children trapped in a bad situation in a workhouse, almost appearing like they are slaves or crushed under the boot heel of their bosses. But our main character, Doll, wants to head out to Screecher's Reach for unknown reasons, and go to a remote cave there, and convinces her best friends to come with her. Because there's rumored to be a ghost there, and they need to go see the ghost. Sort of almost like a Stand By Me. Let's go find the dead body. We gotta go find the ghost that lives in Screecher's Reach.
And meanwhile, we have all this great dialogue about Doll, who wants nothing more than to leave the planet, where her friends are kind of more, they're set in their role. They're a little more satisfied.
Yeah, but Doll has greater ambitions. And so when they finally do reach the cave, we get another great visual sequence where it turns out, at first we think, there is a ghost, And at first it appears, oh, this is just in someone's head. This is one of these dark side locations that we have seen before. It is going to face our young heroine with visions of the dark side, but then she will escape them and emerge a better person. Except no, this is not that. There is an actual Sith or dark side user living in this cave who is violent and dangerous and attempts to kill our heroine with a red lightsaber while animated in the style of an Irish banshee. And it is horrifying.
And I'm trying to recall how Dahl is able to escape this. And does she take the lightsaber and strike down the Sith? Or
Yes, I
yeah,
mean, the Sith turns out to be an old woman nearing the end of her life who is driving everyone away with her connection to the Force. Yeah, so Dahl, using her own abilities, which are not explained and are simply shown in a great use of show don't tell in this episode, takes the lightsaber from the Sith woman and cuts her down with the lightsaber. And leaves her dead in the cave, which then as the light fades, it's revealed to just be this sort of sad, isolated area where there's a pile of rags that serves as her bed, and there's few possessions. So it's just this last sad enclave for this dark banshee-like woman who had nowhere else to go and sort of subsisted her final days, drawing off the dark side of the Force.
but that's not it. We have this old Sith's master arrive on this workhouse planet.
Or rival, we're not quite sure
Yeah.
of their relationship, but it turns out this was not a journey of positivity and self-discovery for Dahl. This was a test. And this was not a test like the dark side nexus on Dagobah, where when you emerge you've learned a lesson. This was a test of, are you willing to go kill the old woman in the cave to prove that you want to be my apprentice by another Sith, the Sith mother.
And Dahl chooses to leave. She leaves her friends. Her friends are saddened. One of them gives her the go-ahead, recognizing that this is all that Dahl has ever wanted. And now we have a brand new Sith who
Yeah.
started their journey.
Yeah, so the ending is not portrayed as a positive one. We feel bad that Dahl has been forced into this situation of needing to kill someone to try to better her life. And despite the Sith Mother dripping with opulence and wealth and apparent acceptance of Dahl, when she enters the ship, it is framed as her being trapped inside and leaving what she has known behind. Her friends are terrified of her and of the Sith that has come to claim her. And we're not particularly happy about the fact that she had to kill someone and take their lightsaber to even enter into the service of her new Sith master. And I think it's also, a commentary on, she was an exploited young person with no options. And so how was she radicalized into joining the Sith? Was someone simply offered her better material conditions and a way to use her talents to escape, but directed them towards a very dark purpose. But she had literally no other options, no other escape, so she turned toward the only source of power and wealth she could find. Not even wealth, but escape.
Yeah. So it's a captivating story. It's very reminiscent of the season 1 finale, Akakiri, in terms of I mean, in Star Wars in general, we have an inclination towards positive endings, where even if Luke learns that he is Darth Vader's son, he will escape and rejoin with the majority of his friends to fight another day. Uh, this is such a downbeat ending in that it twists the idea of hope, and it turns hope into something that manipulators can use in order to take advantage of other people. And that's exactly what's happening to Dahl.
Yeah, she's now been trapped with a new abuser who's going to use her talents for even worse ends. We can definitely see the trajectory of her life is not going to be a happy one. And I think this is also showing, Dahl realizes there are systemic issues and that only there's just a small investment of time and care and effort by anyone could make the life of her and her friends better. But her new Sith Master is only willing to do so only for Dahl, and only if Dahl does what she says, and her new master refuses to materially help her friends at all, and just gives Dahl the choice: you come with me yourself, or you don't come at all. And so she chooses just to leave herself. And again, it is this grappling with systemic issues in Star Wars that many of the media doesn't. Like, the Jedi in their ivory towers don't really, they have sort of a general academic sense of, oh, we need to better society, but what do they actually do to stop, the crushing weight of poverty and systemic injustice? And this is a Sith who is using the levers of systemic injustice to deliberately put someone under their thumb, but not caring and in fact enjoying the benefits of having a desperate population to draw upon.
So, definitely one of the strongest episodes of the season.
Yeah, if not the
Yeah.
best thematically. It is told like a fable, and I mean that in the best way possible, and then twists sort of the Irish Banshee fable into telling a story of the Sith and corruption and exploitation.
Now that I think of it visually, similar to Samurai Jack in that way, where it blends this idea of real and fantastical together in a visual way.
Yeah, the scene of her trapped with the Sith Banshee in the cave is one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in Star Wars. You feel so afraid the entire time. The old ancient Sith woman is portrayed as almost this mass of black scribbles who, she's ethereal, not even quite real, until she's reduced to simply a dead body by being slain. So yeah, aesthetically, it commits to its aesthetic style and uses it for great storytelling purposes. So I give it top marks as well.
Yeah. Before I forget, time frame wise, probably High Republic, because we're dealing with Sith and a idea of a rule of two.
Yeah, and I think it's might even mind High Republic. I'm thinking Old Republic because this is before the Sith have established the rule of two.
Okay.
So we have a whole Sith person with her own title. She's not just the Sith; she's a Sith.
She's a Sith mother. That's right.
Yeah, so I would say Old Republic,
Yeah.
And prior to the extinction of most of the Sith and the establishment of the rule of two.
So, do you want to see more of Screecher's Reach? I just want to see more of the Old Republic, but what do you think?
I'm not sure we necessarily need a continuation of Dahl's story. I think as a fable, you're intended to be able to trace the entire trajectory of the rest of her life in your own head after it ends. I don't think we need one of seeing Dahl fall to the darkness and be, consumed by the gears and machinations of the force that has captured her. That is all, said in the 10 seconds when we see her trapped in the ship and flown away from her friends.
Right.
Will I see more in this style, in this world, in this style? Absolutely. But do we need a continuation of this exact story? I think we've told a complete fable already.
Not necessarily. There could be the return of Dahl to her home planet to see if she can free her friends, but again, it's a full story that's told. But in contrast to this episode and how much we discussed it in its wonderful themes, let's move on to In the Stars, which I think we can tell the audience right now isn't our most favorite episode of Visions.
Yeah, but I think this is also a very important episode. So this is In the Stars by Punk Robot, a Chilean animation studio.
Visually awesome. It reminds me of what's the name of that one studio that does Coraline and Paranorman? Leica. It reminds me of Leica Studios, who made Paranorman, Coraline. It's this visceral, 3D animated, almost stop motion sculpture kind of feel. I'm sure it might be augmented much by digital technology, but visually it's a wonderful landscape to look at, to see the stormtroopers in this time, to see the Imperials in this sculpted form, to see their main characters as more of a ragtag, not ragtag, but more like rags and scavenger type aesthetic versus the more polished Empire in this 3D clay type style. Very interesting. I just wish the characterization was rich enough to match.
Yeah, so Connor is not a fan of this because we have two sisters, one of who is a precocious younger child who makes impetuous decisions, which is not Connor's favorite storytelling device.
Especially when it comes up 3 times this season? 4?
Yeah, but I think we can look at the general plot and themes. So this is a story ultimately about genocide and exploitation again. So happy themes here. Our two sisters, who are the main characters, are the only survivors of a genocide led by the Empire. This is in the Imperial period, against their people who want to exploit their water rights, which is and then steal all their water for use by the Empire, which I believe is a specific use of certain water right issues present in Chile at this point in time as well. So it's definitely using Star Wars as a lens to look at real-world exploitation of indigenous and local populace by corporations and governments that don't care about them. But to the actual episode, our two main characters are force sensitive. It's one reason they've
Yeah, they don't know it necessarily at this time. I believe the younger sister learns that she's force sensitive near the end of the episode.
because their mother was force sensitive and sort of followed a force tradition outside of the Jedi, but as a protector of her people. So we get this just glimpse of this unique culture where there are using specific paints that are drawn from specific flowers that can only be harvested when the starlight of certain stars shines upon them. Think of memorials for people who are lost. So it is this heartbreaking view of this particular culture and how it has been wiped out and wiped away. And we have two young people imperfectly trying to remember, with no one else now to draw upon their traditions, just trying to keep them alive themselves while surviving in on a planet that they can't leave, and where the rest of their people have literally been killed.
Why don't you talk about the characters of Koten and China? Just to give the audiences an idea of why I keep bitching about this episode.
All right. Well, Tachina constantly wants them to fight against the Empire as two young girls on a planet ruled by a military dictatorship. And is often trying to convince her older sister that we can fight back and we can win and we can do that. And none of that is true. They are two people. The needing to fight back against the Empire, as shown in something like Andor, is obviously true.
Mm-hmm.
But Tachina just has a 9-year-old's understanding of what that means. In the moment, we must do whatever we can. Where Koten, her older sister, is trying to get them to fight back. Ultimately, I mean, their situation is relatively hopeless. They do manage a certain amount of success by the end of episode by managing to destroy one of the water factories that the Empire has on their planet.
Yeah, this allows them to reduce the pollution enough for them to paint the mural that's meant to honor their mother and their entire culture that's been wiped out by the Empire.
Well, the ending is also ambiguous whether the main characters are alive or not at the end. They are portrayed as being alive, but they might have just joined with the Force because, as we have established earlier in the episode, stars appear for the dead on their planet, and at the end of the episode, there are two new stars that have joined next to their mother's star.
Mm-hmm.
After the siblings are hit by a tsunami wave of water and forced that, and then we're on a shore here. So whether you see them as having miraculously survived or having died, and our final couple of scenes are of them in an afterlife kind of situation, it's deliberately ambiguous for the viewer.
So thematically mature, visually stunning, even narratively, especially with the ending, interesting.
Connor just can't get past the character of Tachina, who continues to...
She's not someone that we root for, because she's always making impetuous, immature, rash decisions. And never for positive reasons. I mean, take a look at Luke. Luke doesn't want to... even though he wants to get off planet, he knows that he has responsibilities. It's not realistic for him to go off planet. It takes for a major tragedy in his life, the death of his aunt and uncle, for him to become radicalized. That's something that you can relate to.
And I think we can relate to Tachina, the younger sister, wanting to fight the Empire, but and I understand her anger. But she is the realism of her actions is like, how has she managed to survive this long as the only survivor when she is constantly throwing herself into situations like this and then getting captured and needing to be rescued, constantly wanting to fight unwinnable battles. So there's a sense that that she's been deeply traumatized, which I guess both sisters have been. The older sister having needed to take on a parental role, but Connor has a hard time getting past the precocious and character of Tachina, who keeps making bad decisions at every turn.
And even with Koten, it's you're stuck between this one character who wants to keep fighting but doesn't understand the ramifications of what that means, and then her older sister who wants to do no fighting whatsoever and just wants to get water when it's, clearly understandable that this is not a, again, sustainable goal. You can't keep running away from the Empire, so in my perfect world, it would be a more gradual, understandable shift where both of them learned that we need to fight against the Empire, but we can't be so rash about it. And that didn't happen. And therefore, I don't really care about either character. because one is so stubborn against fighting and one is so gung-ho towards fighting that I don't feel necessarily bad if they end up in the stars by the end. And the last complaint I'll say is that this season alone does precocious youth, and it does uh, thematic representation of culture better in separate episodes than this one. Which, sorry, Star Wars fans, but this episode is at the bottom of my list for the season.
Yeah, I still think it is a good episode for grappling with the effect of genocide and how the Empire was totally a genocidal fascist regime.
Mhm.
They destroyed an entire planet just to steal their water resources.
Yeah.
And so I think using that as a lens by which you can see how that happens in the real world was compelling, even if the characters themselves were not the most nuanced compared to some other episodes in this season.
Mhm.
Yeah, visually stunning in the claymation style with the main characters. As far as a continuation, well, I'm of the belief that the main characters died at the end, so I don't think there's going to be a continuation. We know the Empire eventually loses, but the damage that they've done to the cultures and people around there can never really be undone.
And there's so many stories in the Imperial era as is that there's not necessary expansion, in my opinion. So, now for something completely different.
All right, so there's one episode in every season of Visions that sort of just is played for laughs and comedy. It was the Tatooine Rhapsody in Visions Season 1, just about a former Jedi Padawan who becomes the lead singer of a band. This one episode, I Am Your Mother, by Aardman Animations, as set in the UK, and leaning heavily into UK humor, is a straight-up farce. And I don't mean that in that it's bad, I mean it is a farcical comedy.
This animation style, it could be the same animation style, but it feels like Wallace and Gromit. Um, as far as just interesting, fun, quirky characterization. This is a story that's set in. This would be post Empire, start of the New Republic.
Yeah, so this is set in the New Republic era, and is about a young Twilight girl in flight school and her embarrassing working class mother. So it is heavily leaning into classism and how, in a UK fashion, where we must, people are embarrassed by being of lower class and by their parents' cultural touchstones, and they must, even though she's being sent to the fancy school, our main character doesn't think that she belongs, and is trying to avoid having her mother know about this race that's happening, because her much more well-off and, snooty classmates would look down on her and her mother.
And even in this short episode, we get enough context and flashback to see that the Twi'lek and her mother were very close, and they bonded, and she had no qualms with her mother's kind of trashy ship and lifestyle. And it's only until after she embraces that and gets over her embarrassment that she's able to win the race with her mother against the Vanderbilts or the rich.
No, the Van Riepels.
I was close. So they're just a rich family with definitely an imperial styled cruiser. Even though this is after the Empire, it's red and black and sleek.
Well, it has a little Death Star hood ornament that shoots out a super laser to try to sabotage the competition. As I said, this is a farcical comedy. We have Wedge Antilles selling his own merch line, for example, despite Wedge, in canon being sort of this retiring, pilot with a mild to moderate amount of post-traumatic stress disorder.
He's now become a shill.
Yeah, who at this point is recovering from torture at the hands of the Imperial Remnant.
Yeah.
But yeah, this episode leans into the comedy. So it is using Star Wars as a lens for class commentary in a UK context. In that, our main character has a working class mother who she is embarrassed by and doesn't want people to know. It's like, oh, my mother is like a cleaner and a droid mechanic and is not independently wealthy like some of my classmates. And I'd rather than not find out, to the point where I'd rather not even participate in this race that my mother must be at, so that no one knows that I come from a poor background. Which is a uniquely, Cotter and I are Americans, so we can sort of understand sort of this UK classism. Classism exists in America, but it portrays itself differently in media than like class depictions in the UK, where I think class is more openly and rigidly stratified. But it is certainly lampooning the wealthier side of society and their sort of snootiness and sense of superiority, and also comparing them to the Empire and the Imperial Remnant, which is fun.
Mm-hmm. And so this is an episode that I wholeheartedly embrace because, unlike the last one, this one knows that it is farcical. It knows that it is a satire on just celebrity, perhaps, along with this idea of classism. Just we have Wedge Antilles just plastered on so many things, and he's promoting this race when we don't have a great characterization of Wedge in the canon film media itself. In the expanded lore, I know he gets more characterization, but it's just fun. And the episode title being "I Am Your Mother," being this reflection of Darth Vader's line of "No, I am your father." It is such a fun reflection of. I should say it's such a fun parallel of being something that is silly, something that is still serious as far as its themes, but it's still emotionally resonant because we have this main character who embraces her, on the surface embarrassing mother and is able to win this race for it. So,
yeah, and I would say this episode to the hilt plays up the animation it's using to tell a visual storytelling as well, simply the written story. Even though it's this claymation style, but we get the movement and body and actions of the characters are all well portrayed.
Yeah.
Connor knows this episode is not my favorite, but I definitely can see how it is maximizing the genre and storytelling devices present in animation to improve the impact of its story.
I had enough complaint on In the Stars. What weren't you a fan of so much in I Am Your Mother?
I felt that it lacked nuance in that, okay, so there's this systemic problem of class, but then it's putting the pressure on our lower class girl just to be fine with her background without admitting it's like, hey, maybe the Van Riepels at the end are defeated and embarrassed, but it's sort of like, typically, no, the rich people win, and if they don't win, they then just ruin the lives of the poor people around them. So it was too much of a feel-good story of like, you just put in enough effort and work and it'll succeed, without sort of acknowledging like, no, the whole structure itself, burn it all down. It's bad. We burned down the Empire. Why don't we burn down, the weird class system that it came with? So again, it felt like it's my problem with a lot of British things. It's like the status quo was not going to change, so just do your best in it, stiff upper lip. Accept your mother, accept where you came from, don't try to better yourself. Yeah, and that might be my American side talking now that I'm coming from a healthier society. But I'm like, let's acknowledge, like, the systemic issues require systemic solutions and not just a feel-good, yes, now I accepted my mother. But that's a good personal journey for our main character. But we're coming out of this, like, man, the people are awful and we should, like, it's not only our main character, but no one should feel bad from the background that they come from.
Right.
And other than on an individual basis, what is being done to, I guess it's sort of too much about accepting the world as it is and surviving as you're in it than it is about
affecting actual change in a way and improvement.
Yeah, which I think a lot of our other episodes in this season are acknowledging the need for greater change beyond just the individual. And so this one focusing, and I guess it was a comedy, so I'm not being too critical, but I am in general critical of endings where it's just like, if you come to a personal realization, you can stop the negative parts of, your society from affecting you as much. I'm like, it's a cheap answer.
I think that's fair. I think that there could be greater nuance, there could be greater, a greater effect on a systematic change rather than just this individual story. I would say that's kind of what In the Stars is as well. It's this individual development, but that is much more so these individuals overcoming the Imperials rather than just accepting that they're there and that they can't beat them. So I see what you mean from there.
As far as a continuation, I do not believe I Am Your Mother requires a continuation.
Nope.
It told a complete comedy, and most comedies do not require sequels.
Right. So the next episode I would say is it's a South Korean studio.
Yeah, so the episode is Journey to the Dark Head.
And it has
Studio Mir, as Connor said, a South Korean animation studio.
Very dark tonally. This is, I think, compared to all the episodes we've had so far, the most serious in this season. This feels like a season 1 episode as far as just how somber the tone is.
Yeah, this episode, it's like, do you have time to breathe? Because we are getting through a lot of story in 11 minutes, so
Mm-hmm.
pay attention. But we introduce a lot of aspects in Journey to the Dark Head. So we have two main characters, one of which is a monk, Ara, who is a devotee of a Force tradition outside the Jedi and Sith, who believe about information and using the Force to see the future in like a precognitive sense, but without actually affecting or changing it.
Right, but just recording the future, correct?
Yes. And then the rest of the galaxy at large, there's an ongoing war between the Jedi and the Sith. Mm-hmm. So again, we are definitely Old Republic or earlier. You know, the Jedi and Sith are still have massive groups and are fighting with each other before the rule of two sends the Sith underground into a more plotting and scheming way. And we have the other main character being a Jedi Padawan who survived an encounter with a Sith master, and in quintessential Sith fashion, he killed the Padawan's master, left him for dead, and was like, "At some point, you shall join me." Because Sith always play that gamble. They play that gamble 100% of the time. Will a traumatized youth in the Force with all these powers eventually fall to the dark side? There's a good chance. So we're just going to keep throwing those little seeds out, and they eventually come back to haunt the Jedi.
And in 11 minutes, we get a just perfect sense of how still terrorized he is by the thought of this Sith, and how terrorized or terrified he is of his own dark impulses.
Yeah, and how bad the Jedi are at managing trauma for adolescents. They're like, connect with the Force. Go on. It's like, no, he needs some cognitive behavioral therapy and some perhaps some trauma reframing to like work through what happened and come to accept it. The Force is just not enough here. But yeah, so he's literally in fear. We're worried almost the whole time that Tool, our Jedi Padawan character, might fall to the dark side. He's acting rashly, impulsively, out of fear and anger, while trying to keep Ara alive. Ara being the former monk turned mechanic who thinks that the war can be ended, and that these two great stone heads that her order maintains are the font of the light and dark side, and are the cause of the conflict in the galaxy.
And they are these massive statues. If you've watched Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, as the Fellowship is going towards the lands of who gives a shit, I can't remember now, you see these two enormous statues with their hands held forward.
They're heading down the river out of the lands of Lothlorien, heading for the borders of Mordor. Connor, I'm very disappointed in you.
Well, Alex gives a shit, so, you know. I knew that he would. So, by the time that Ara and Tool get to these statues, the Sith Lord is waiting for them.
Yeah, and so the fights that happen are very well animated. We see, a Sith Lord sort of in his full power, but he's not really attempting to kill Tool for most of it. He's still trying to turn him to the dark side, with classic Sith. So yeah, a powerful new apprentice using his trauma to fuel his power. The Sith Lord really wants that, as any Sith would. And Ara is utterly convinced, hey, if we just cut off the head of the dark statue, we'll end this war forever. But it ends with the realization that the statues are, one, not the font of the light and dark side, despite the Jedi Council authorizing the mission. They are simply reflections of the universe at large, and the dark and light powers flow between them, because light and dark is constantly shifting and moving. It depends on your perspective. So you cannot... And this is the why I really... Even though this episode moves way too fast for me, and I am not the biggest fan, I love how it acknowledges that good and evil is a matter of perspective from where you are at the time, based on what the information you have, and that there is no quick and easy solution for overcoming darkness. You cannot simply go and cut off the head of the great stone statue and end war and terror. It requires effort, time, and acknowledgement of what has happened, and not just the easy solution.
Just in the same way you can't just kill Darth Vader, you have to turn him to the light side and put the work in order to make that turn happen and to convince him of his errors and ills.
Yeah, so that is why I really like this thematically. Visually, this is probably the most traditionally animated episode we've come across so far.
Probably the most traditionally animated, one of the most traditionally animated of this season.
Yeah, but it does not suffer for that, and it certainly enjoy the confrontation between Tool and Bichon, his Sith, the Sith Lord attempting to turn him to the dark side. We had exploding speeders in midair, and the depiction of the great heads is, the scale of the final conflict is very large.
Yeah,
and
awe-inspiring.
Yeah, impressive. Yeah, so we've established where this is set in the timeline. This one is set in the Old Republic period before the Sith go underground, and there's an open war between the Jedi and the Sith.
I wouldn't mind seeing more because at this point, as we talked about in our era discussion, there's nothing out there for the Old Republic.
Yeah, you got Knights of the Old Republic, and the parts of it they decide are canon, and very little else. So I think this is the first episode we've had this season where a continuation could be called for.
Yeah, it's implied by the end for sure.
Yeah, Tool and Ara are going to set off to attempt to combat darkness in the galaxy. Tool is working on overcoming his trauma, and Ara is realizing there are no easy solutions to her own childhood trauma.
So, quality episode. Visually, thematically, characterization-wise, quite enjoyable.
All right. And we come to our next episode, episode 6, The Spy Dancer, by Studio La Cachée. This is a French studio.
I was so ready to hate this one because with an episode like The Spy Dancer, just like having bunny rabbits be our protagonists, I'm just initially not on board for something like that, and I should learn to withhold judgment until I actually finish watching something.
Because this is probably the best episode of the season.
Mm-hmm.
We're set in Occupation Paris, 1943. I'm sorry. We're set in the Imperial... we're set in the Imperial occupation of an unnamed planet, where stormtroopers are in a French. I'm sorry, not a French bar, but
no, it's a French bar. Everyone has French accents. This is Space France.
Yeah, so we're in Space France, but not in a bad way. So this is an episode that is taking. So if you're familiar with all the tropes and visual aesthetic signposts of basically. Vichy Paris under the control of the Nazis and applying them to the Empire's control of planets. And it is stunning. Mm-hmm. So our main character is a middle-aged woman, which I love. It's not a traumatized youth or a precocious child. We have...
Or a pair of siblings, yeah. A pair of siblings with a precocious child, yeah.
Yeah. So we have a, older woman who is attempting to lead a rebel cell against the Empire in her own way. So she's part of La Resistance.
Her whole troop is sort of linked together in this operation, which I found quite interesting. It's not just her sole operation, but it's everyone collaborating in order to contribute to this performance.
Yes, you need organization and actionable steps to overcome an empire and resistance, and so it's a very and they're always terrified and paranoid of discovery. But then we also have this episode. And her job as the spy dancer is to both be a visual distraction and to spy on the Imperial officers. She is seen as a willing collaborator. She entertains the high-ranking and mid-ranking stormtroopers and Imperial officers. But she also has this personal tragedy in her backstory where her hometown was destroyed by the Empire and most people were killed. And her child was taken from her into an Imperial indoctrination camp. And then she finally recognizes one of the visiting Imperial officers from this, time of the very rise of the Empire as her son. And
at first she thinks it's the officer that kidnapped her son. But it's not until we learn that the son is just wearing the same trappings. He has an eye patch covering one eye, and all the aliens on this planet have heterochromia, so two different colored eyes, I believe blue and yellow. So she slowly learns by the end that this is very likely her son, because right age, eye patch.
Yeah, and he wears a hat, and then we learn at the end of the episode that he's hiding the spot where he cut off his horns. And so there's this, it's how do people survive in an occupied society when your entire culture is suppressed? How do you form bonds and resist the fascist forces? And we're the gloves are off here. The Empire are Nazis. Fascism is bad. Go punch fascists. This episode is telling you that in no uncertain terms, in a way that perhaps only France could do. It's like, please go punch the fascists. But also, and how it even when people are suborned or are taken under fascism, they are forced into conformity. And literally, her son has to cut off parts of himself, literally, to survive and fit in. Has to hide everything about who he actually is. And he realizes this on some level because he lets his mother live at the end. And she lets him live hoping they can find some reconciliation,
Mhm.
which is utterly at odds with her sort of pragmatic approach. The rest of it, when it comes to her family, she's unable to contain her hope that she can bring her son back to the side of her family, despite the horrible things that he's done.
And so we have a story with no Force users. We have a beautifully animated vignette, almost like a colored pencil illustration all throughout.
Yeah, because she's still a dancer. So
Mhm.
there's several scenes of her doing this dancing in sort of like a sci-fi Cirque du Soleil, where using these great ribbons and curtains and fabric to dance around and plant listening devices on the Imperials, and then explosives. Has like almost these Assassin's Creed style hidden blades that she's going to attempt to use to kill some Imperials before she realizes it's her son. So visually stunning. The
Mhm.
storytelling is tight and emotional, and I loved everything about it.
Yeah, it's as far as narrative maturity, it is the most. Um, I don't want to say influential. It's the most impactful episode, just as far as seeing that yes, war is bad, fascism is bad. Not that we needed these reminders, but this is such a strong communication of that it hits you in the heart, which Star Wars at its best always does.
Yeah, so yeah, the spy dancer, and yeah, fascism is bad, war is bad, and then even attempting to survive or enter into a power structure that's exploitative, it will corrupt and change you even when you're inside of it.
And so we have another episode with a cliffhanger. I would love to pursue this just for the sake of the characters themselves, just because they're so engaging.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think the spy dancer needs a continuation, but if it got one, I would enjoy it. Perhaps focusing around the Sun character after the fall of the Empire,
Mhm.
and perhaps how a society heals from the rifts caused by needing to survive, being ruled by an empire that attempted to separate and destroy everyone. Some people were going to have collaborated, some people will have um, made some terrible decisions, and so how do you as a society heal from that? Could be a way that a new episode could go.
So would love to see it. It's not necessary, but this one was so captivating that I think, much like the Ronin, there's more to be told.
Right, this brings us to episode 7 of season 2 of Visions, The Bandits of Golok by 88 Pictures, an Indian animation studio.
This animation could fit right alongside the Clone Wars. Who's that old Jedi from Clone Wars? Is it Terra Sinube?
It depends, there's a lot of old Jedi.
Who's the old Jedi with the white lightsaber that Ahsoka is partnered up with? It is Terra Sinube. There's an alien who looks just like him in here, and it caused me to question: do they use Clone Wars like animation models in this episode? Because it looks so polished and so uh, I don't know, so similar to what we've seen in the Clone Wars. This could narratively and visually slot alongside and be its own side episode, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the Bandits of Golok is set during the reign of the Empire, when we have Inquisitors and Vader and others hunting down Force-sensitive children because they cannot accept the rise of other Jedi. And so we were in a alien planet going towards the city of Golok on a train, and we have another precocious child.
This one at least is so young that they don't understand that I need to rebel and fight. They just want candy.
Yeah, and so we have a young child who's been sheltered for her entire life and who's force sensitive. And we have an older brother who realizes the stakes of what's happening, that she could be killed or taken away, and so is trying to get her to the Path, which is a group of people that will hide force sensitive children and Jedi from the Inquisitors and the Empire.
Yet another reason why this episode slots alongside so well with the animation we've seen and the canon that we have, with the Path being such a major focus for shows like Kenobi, games like Fallen Order, correct?
Yeah, and as revealed in Kenobi and the Fallen Order, it's you can't destroy killing 10,000 very specific people if even with a 99% success rate, you still have 100 survivors. So, but we get a precocious child who makes bad decisions, uses the Force to steal candy, not realizing, thinking things are all a game.
Too young.
Yeah, we're more forgiving of her because of these than perhaps other characters. I was frustrated by her, much like her older brother, but her older brother's love for her is obvious, and it's very clear that she's from a sheltered background. She's like, what, 7?
Yeah, even yeah.
Yeah, and has not yet been confronted with like the absolute need for survival because her brother's been sheltering her from that, and is absolutely actively lying to her about the truth of their situation, which not a good look, man. No, Charuk, you have to be honest with Ronnie. But they eventually reach this oasis where they were trying to go after escaping some stormtroopers. When arrives the Inquisitor with drip,
Yes.
my favorite depiction of an Inquisitor to date.
It's a very, like, I mean, if you look at a lot of cultural media in India and you see the typical villain depictions, it's very similar in regards to what we get in this Inquisitor with his mustache and his ornamentation.
Yeah, this episode is like, yes, we're an Indian studio. Yes, we're influenced by Bollywood. You deal with it because it is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
So our Inquisitor is going to have drip. We're going to have lots of slow motion. We're going to have characters dramatically looking at each other while we imagine what emotions that they feel. And then we're going to have an elaborate fight sequence that is done to the hilt. And then we're going to have our main villain die by uttering a final one-liner and collapsing while looking killer doing it.
He is defeated by this matronly old woman.
Yeah, RuPaul.
At Golak. And she's the one who instantly recognizes that the child, that Ronnie is force sensitive, and defeats the Inquisitor and takes her along the path, leaving some words with her brother just to give him some peace, knowing that his sister is, starting her journey.
Yeah. So with the influence of Indian cinema and Indian animation here, with just leaning into the aesthetic but telling a tight and relatively simple story. Force-sensitive child must escape the Inquisitors, fails and must be saved by a Jedi. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I mean, considering the journey to the Dark Head and the Spy Dancer, which has flashbacks and intriguing character relationships, this one does as well. But it's a straightforward cinematic story told in a visually brilliant way. No flaws. It's solid. It doesn't have the same heights, perhaps, as something like The Spy Dancer, where it tells a different kind of story. But it's still more than successful in telling its own story.
Yeah, I don't think this one needs a continuation. I would love more in this style.
Yes.
I would love to see another thing set on Golok, because the city itself is amazing, animated. I would like to maybe see more of this Inquisitor before he died, because he absolutely steals the show. But as far as the exact story, other than perhaps if Ronnie wants to come back as a Jedi in the New Republic, be fine with that. But other than that, I think we don't need a continuation. We can just enjoy it as it is.
And as far as I'm concerned, this is canon. There's no reason to say it's not.
It fits very well in with, seamlessly into the Star Wars universe as a whole. As does the next episode, which is our most depressing episode. And we've hit some doozies already here.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 8, The Pit.
I'll let you take this one.
Which is a collaboration between D'Art Shitagio, and I'm going to butcher that, and Lucasfilm. So this is one that's directly inspired by, Lucasfilm themselves. So a fusion of Japanese and U.S. animators. Our theme is slavery, everyone. And the worst parts of capitalist exploitative slavery. The Empire is here. The Empire is forcing its slaves to dig in. Sorry, I'm going to say the word enslaved people, because they are not slaves, which is an important thing. They are people who have been enslaved. So they are forced to dig for kyber crystals out in punishing conditions for years in a mine in the middle of a desert. And then as soon as the kyber crystals are exhausted, after a brutal depiction of their oppression, which is also depicted very corporately, it's like they are oppressed with a minimum effort. The reason they're in a pit is because then we don't need to have guards ever watch them. They are forced to maintain the trappings of their own imprisonment, and then they are simply abandoned. It would not be worth to bring the couple hundred people out from the bottom of the pit, so they just leave them there to die
and deal with the ramifications of, you put us in a pit.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know why we're mining kyber crystals for our Death Star. Well, no one can talk about that. So we're just going to leave all these slaves to die. But also, it would be expensive to actually just, kill all of you with our 4 stormtroopers that are our entire
Yeah.
security force. So we're just going to let the elements and lack of resources do the work for us. Which is, it's the utter reduction of humanity to numbers on a spreadsheet that really got to me during this one. It's like, it is going to be cheaper to leave you to die of hunger than to kill you. It's going to be cheaper to kill you than to even keep you on as enslaved people. So we're just going to leave you to die.
And so the tragedy continues where we have one brave soul named Crux who decides, you know what, I'm going to get help. It's I can't stay in this pit. There's a world out there. People will help us. You got to remain hopeful. So he escapes and he goes to this beautiful city that has no doubt profited on the backs of these enslaved people. And as soon as he arrives, he is taken by stormtroopers and then dropped back into the pit to his death.
Yeah, so we have our young protagonist, almost prophet character, who dragged himself out of the pit, reaches the promised land, delivers his message of needing help, where he starts to be received, and is literally thrown to his death, martyred 2 minutes later, which is brutally realistic as far as people who are attempting to either speak truth to power or to oppose such a powerful evil regime. They are killed, and they make no bones about it. He's not. There is no dramatic firing squad where he is able to give some final words. There is no final rescue by a Jedi. Like 2 bored stormtroopers just drag him to the edge of the pit and the edge, and they're like, this was supposed to be cheaper, and they throw him into the pit right in front of his sister where he dies. And it's horrifying. But as a martyr, he then inspires the people of the city who apparently, and ending on a more hopeful note, did not realize that when the suffering was far away and we didn't know about it, they were fine with it. But now that it's right here and there might be people dying, the stakes are hopeful. Like, they are willing to oppose the Empire to go and rescue the people trapped in the pit.
It's like the people in the city don't even know that there's this pit out there. They have everything they need within their city, and it takes the Denzians of the pit to start chanting for the population of the city to actually hear and notice them, and they're able to overcome the stormtroopers and save these victims.
Yeah, and it is not simply one person acting by themselves, like, oh, I need to go save the people. It takes the entire city acting as a whole, young, old, men, women, the rich and the poor alike, to, as a body, bypass the, let's call it what it is. There's a police line trying to prevent our protesters from getting by and doing this injustice in much like the scene for V for Vendetta. They can't all be stopped. They push their way by the Imperials, who simply quit in a huff, and rescue the people from the pit. So it is a sign of community, of how a community can come together to prevent injustice, but how it requires willing to brave the violence inherent in an oppressive system.
So again, it's one of the darkest, most serious, mature stories, but it has hopeful endings still. We have this sense of community, of freedom, and isn't that what Star Wars is all about as well? It's this small group of rebels banding together in order to overcome this large, imposing organization of stormtroopers and other Imperials.
Yeah, and then we even end the episode with the sister of our murdered main character, having kept a kyber crystal, realizing that she is force sensitive, and bonding with the kyber crystal as only a Jedi can do.
Which I felt was fine. I at that point in the story, I thought that narratively things have wrapped up. The people are saved. She's a Jedi, cool, but I think that the story of these people, not just in the pit, but in the city, banding together in order to right the wrongs of society is the great exchange in this story.
I felt there's more commentary on that, that quote where I am more worried about all the Einsteins that have died in sweatshops. I'm paraphrasing a quote, but where she is this girl who has such great potential and natural talent, and was going to die at the bottom of a pit of enslaved people, abandoned by those in power after having her whole life just been kept on an exploitive forced labor.
Oh yeah, that's apt.
Right, so that's episode 8. So now we come to the final episode of Vision Season 2, episode 9. Um, you can pronounce this for me.
Yeah, this is Ow's Song by Triggerfish, a South African production company. This is probably set during the High Republic. This is after the Sith extinction, and it is the bubbliest, brightest, like, this looks like it's made out of yarn, this animation style. It's something that, again, I've never seen before.
So it's all about there's a planet where it's full of mines of kyber crystals, sort of reminding us of Ilum, sort of in
Mhm.
the far future. But in a final act of war during the war with the Sith corrupted all the kyber in this planet, and so the Jedi must purify it a bit at a time because kyber crystal is precious and living in the Force. So sort of this, even though it's bright and happy, and our main character is like a 8-year-old child who's primarily mute. Uh, we also get this sense of this is, even though it is happy, this is still a setting where we are dealing with the after effects of a war that no
Mhm.
one alive remembers happening, but its effects linger, almost like landmine fields that are still left up in areas where wars have been fought, or
Mhm.
crumbling ruins that are dangerous to go by, unexploded ordnance found on a beach. So this is again, or radiation by left behind by a nuclear bomb. So we have this dangerous side effect of a war that's been fought a long time ago, and how the traditions of the people around it have been altered and changed by the side effects of um, that violence from the
Mhm.
past, and the long term environmental damage that it did.
Yeah, there's this little girl named Owl and her father Abat who are going through the mines, and it seems like she has a weird effect on these crystals. Whenever she sings by them, they become volatile. There's some conflict within them, and he is very concerned for her safety. He doesn't want her to get damaged, and is trying to work with a Jedi in order to go and heal the crystals.
Yeah, but Abbott, caring but fearful father for he's like, hey, there's all these landmines still around. You shouldn't. Your singing happens to cause the landmines to explode or the kyber crystals to explode. You shouldn't sing. And look, it hurt people when you did it. So he's trying to deliver a lesson, but while also being afraid of his daughter's abilities. And so Ao singing does have the ability to purify the crystals because she has a connection with them, which
Mhm.
she's able to do by the end of the episode. But it is against the initial traditions and way her people have operated for a long
Mhm.
time.
So this is it's got a little bit of the shade of a action disaster film where we have her singing causing some volatile effects again, some more raucous effects to the caves that she and her father are in. The Jedi tries to save them, but it ends up that her owl's singing allows for the crystals to become completely pure, and that in embracing this talent that her father has been trying to prevent her from exploring is actually what is integral to healing the planet.
Yeah, and thematically, this is also being is consistent with how we've seen kyber crystals act before, where the dark side can bleed them and corrupt them into forming red, and then they, like much with Ahsoka Tano's white lightsaber crystals, they can then be purified and healed of their trauma.
So yeah, it's by the end we get this realization from the Jedi that Al is special, that Al needs to join her, which means that Al has to leave her home and her father, which in kind of paralleling the episode that we had near the beginning of the season with Screecher's Reach, we have this end where someone is about to go on this metaphysical journey to reach their full potential, but it is done so in a much more positive and an uplifting way.
Yeah, and that is the final episode of season 2 of Visions. This one I do not believe needs a continuation.
It's harmless. It's not the most memorable, as you know. You can see from the fact that we had to kind of mumble and mumble through the plot description of this one, but yeah, it's one that was visually interesting, was uh, nice. But I think if the season really wanted to end on an impact, it could have ended with the pit, it could have ended with the spy dancer. We had such a clincher with the first season, with a really somber end.
Yeah, so we ended more positively this one with here's the journey of a young person and discovering their abilities, and then having to make the decision to enter the wider world, which I think was not a bad way to end.
So, how would you compare this season to the first one as far as your personal enjoyment goes?
I would say I enjoyed them both equally. I would say I liked the diversity of animation and stories told by season 2. We are not. It's not just all about Jedi and Sith. We had several episodes that didn't use the Force at all, exploring and using more of the storytelling devices of Star Wars to highlight, parallels in the real world as speculative fiction should, about issues of family, issues of exploitation, slavery, genocide, resources, inequality, and how that would play out in our galaxy far, far away.
I would echo you in saying that I appreciate both seasons equally. It's a fantastic series. Just the opportunity that Lucasfilm and Disney is giving all of these studios is just fantastic in allowing for there to be more diverse, visually and narratively diverse Star Wars within the series is just great. And I would definitely encourage any Star Wars fan to check it out. I do think that the second season had maybe one more dud as far as episodes go than the first season, but I feel like the second season these episodes can fit alongside Star Wars media even more closely than season one, which in a way, I mean, it's great to see alternative stories, but it's also excellent to be able to tie this right into modern era, past era, things like that.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to our survey of the season 2 of Star Wars Visions. Let us know your thoughts on each episode. Hope you enjoyed that, and we look forward to talking more Star Wars in the future.
Yeah, look forward to our next visual media expansion whenever the writer and actor strike is complete in Hollywood. So, see you again in 12 years, everybody.
All right. Thank you for listening.